I mean, anything that we do in our lives that's valuable is going to cost us something. And so you have to put yourself out in a place of this is going to be costly, this is going to be painful, and to normalize struggle as you are making something good. You know, the calling to make things, like the very first thing we learn about God, it's like the fifth word. He created, right? So we are creators. We make in the manner that we were made.
My guest today is John Hendricks, who is an award-winning illustrator. He worked for the New York Times. He's a professor at a major university. He illustrates all kinds of things, including books about Jesus for children and graphic novels about heavy topics like Dietrich Bonhoeffer's execution. He's also a really interesting man, an elder in his local church. I'm delighted to have John Hendricks with us today. From the Center for Faith and Work here in St. Louis, this is Working with me, your host, Dan Doriani. Here we strive to fire the imagination of Christians who long to practice their faith in the workplace. Through conversations with doctors, athletes, teachers, executives, and more, we seek to engage those who desire to do significant work, to practice love and justice in their work, and who dare to change their corner of the world through that work. So I have John Hendricks with me today. He is almost a freshly minted professor, full professor, which is a big deal, at Washington University here in St. Louis, which is one of our nation's fine universities.
That's right.
And John is not, a physicist. He is not a medical researcher. He's an artist, illustrator with a nice resume. And some really nice books that he has illustrated for children, some books he wrote and illustrated for children.
That's right.
And some books.
Double thread.
Yeah, and some books that actually showed up in the card catalog, if there is still such a thing, as a children's book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's actually listed as a children's book.
Yeah. It's a hard sell to a secular publisher, but I did it.
Yeah, I would call it a book for adults.
It really is.
Yeah, but a child can learn from it if they're highly intelligent and maybe 10, 12, 14 years old.
It's a middle grade book as they would define it, but I've had plenty of adults read Faithful Spy and tell me they learned things about the rise of Hitler or how the Third Reich came to power that they did not fully articulate in their mind before. So that's very satisfying to hear.
It is satisfying to hear. My wife and I have both read that graphic novel, and I learned a couple things, and I was also reminded of things. I know we'll get into these, things more, but you're a graphic novelist, and you've got one done and one in process on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and friends, sometimes called the Inklings. I learned that babies were baptized in the name of Hitler.
Crazy,
times.
right? Crazy.
Yeah, and Heil Hitler, a lot of people know, kind of means Hail Hitler, but it could also mean salvation to Hitler or salvation from Hitler.
Yeah, much more like my king, my savior, rather than my leader, which is the translation is it's one of those that the German doesn't quite approach the true meaning of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they looked at him as leader savior.
Yeah. Oh, literally days after he, announced himself as the Führer,
The Führer, not a Führer.
Yeah, right. The Führer.
Yeah, right.
Bonhoeffer was on the radio saying with his kind of landmark address, God is my Führer, and that is the only person we should give that title to. So he was out in front. I mean, you could make an argument he was the first public declaration against Hitler as Führer that we know of.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there probably were others, but we have the record. He was lacking what I sometimes call the fear gene, it seemed to me.
Yeah.
There are some people that wander through life unaware that they could be bent on self-immolation.
Agreed.
And maybe it's foolhardiness, maybe it's raw courage and faith.
Yeah. I know, I look back at him and think, I would make all those choices. And I don't think I would make any of those choices. We just don't, we really have a hard time grasping what it would feel like to be a human being with a family, with the concerns of life, and make those kind of choices. I wrote a kid's book about John Brown, who I think is in a similar vein. I love these people in history that had this sort of nexus of courage and crisis and faith and how those connected.
Yeah, that's good. I have to say I haven't read that one. Since we're going this direction, let's talk a little bit more about Bonhoeffer. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is that maybe you had a look at the current age, not just the past, and the need to be bold in our own age. Was that on your mind a little or a great deal?
Well, it was on my mind a great deal as I was executing the actual art for the book.
Yes.
I came up with the idea in 2013, and these books take a long time.
Yes.
And I honestly felt like, does the world need another book about the Holocaust?
Right.
It just seems like there are so many colossal works. What could I possibly add?
Right.
And I also felt like, my books are meant for young people in an educational sphere.
Right.
Do we need to continually be telling people the Nazis were evil?
Right.
And then as my book is published, suddenly there is a literal Nazi rally in Virginia, and it was
Right.
like I should get no credit for any sort of prescience. I think that was, God's timing in that sense. So I was sort of blessed to be able to speak into a conversation that was happening that I really did not design, but
Yeah.
it did have some resonance for sure.
Yeah, but there are always possibilities for radicalism and wild excess and pressure, right and left, not so much the center usually.
Right.
I mean, it occurs to me that one of my favorite quotations is from an archbishop of a Catholic church in Chicago who said about the status of Christianity in the world today, and he died a couple of years ago, but he said, I believe I will die in my bed. I believe my successor will die in chains. I believe his successor may die in the flames, and I believe his successor may pick up the ashes of Western civilization, as the church has done so many times before. Now, I'm not sure he was saying he actually believes that strict succession will occur, but I think it's worth remembering that whether you're thinking of Chicago or the world, there are always threats. And if you stand up to the big bullies, the powerful bullies, there could be grave consequences.
That's right. Yeah.
I certainly tell my students, are you willing to suffer for your faith? You have to ask that question.
I think about it all the time, and I think that's why we find history so compelling. It gives us a lens to see as someone else did, and
Right.
to inject our hopes and fears that are real to us, but when we think of history, often seem like, well, those people were different.
Yes.
And they were not. They were the same.
They were different in certain superficial ways.
That's right, yeah.
But I'm sure,
The human condition was the same, right?
Bonhoeffer's heart must have been thumping out of his chest when
Yeah.
he gave some of his talks and took some of his
He
actions.
made bad decisions. He refused to do a funeral or a wedding, I can't remember, for a friend of his that was of Jewish background. But this was before he made his hard decisions, and he remembered feeling extreme guilt.
Yeah.
And just like, I made the wrong choice. So, it's not like he knew instantly the right thing and did it. He felt the grief of making the wrong choice. And even when he went to America to flee
Yes.
Germany, he knew
He had to
I
go
made
back.
the wrong choice.
Yeah.
He remembered that echo of like, I need to do the right thing, even though he knew it would end, in his death, most likely.
Well, it's hard to do the right thing in a real crisis when you're in
yeah.
uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And if you come out in the right end 3/4 of the time, you've done really well in a crisis, I think. But good things happen. One of the points in your book is that he encountered a pretty fiery preacher, politician named Adam Clayton Powell, who gave a sermon that stirred him. It's not enough to think, and that's a good word for an academician.
That's right.
Like Bonhoeffer, you and me, realistically. You have to act.
Yeah.
And he took that to heart, as you showed in your book.
Yeah, that nexus of the civil rights, the early civil rights movement in America, and Bonhoeffer's own experience, it was like the perfect little cauldron for him to take, his love of God and his love of God as like being present in God's church, right? He loved the idea of the church.
Yes.
And then to see the African American experience and to say that it's not just mental assent. It is, there is a doing.
Yeah.
And then he saw that played out in America, and as his friend Frank Fisher took him around, and he was, they went to a diner together, and they were told they couldn't eat together, and Bonhoeffer could not.
Fisher being black.
Fisher was black from Harlem.
Right.
And, Bonhoeffer wrote home and said, can you imagine something like this happening in Germany?
And then what's happening in Germany is not refusal of meals, but
That's right.
extermination.
Yes. So that dissonance early on, he felt it. And then, he fell in love with the Negro spirituals, and he carried with him that sense of the American black experience to Germany with him.
So it prepared him.
Yeah,
really
did.
To see black Americans and Jewish Germans, if you will, as being in a somewhat similar situation. Not identical by any means.
Right, as he would say, the other. That the church is really otherness. Christ is only present in his church, which is not you, but the outside of you. And so he saw otherness as the Christian experience.
Well, and he also liked to tell happy stories about Samaritans, for example, who do exemplary things in a society where they were the offscouring of the earth, the Samaritans were, that is. So one thing I'm going to ask this question. The Bonhoeffer book is not what anybody would call pretty at all. And I don't think you go for pretty in general. I mean, I'm not saying your work is unattractive. I
don't make the Thomas Kincaid level. Right. It's not saccharine, maybe. It's not sweet.
It's not. The Book of Kells, sort of look at that green, at that blue.
Yeah.
How do you get those colors?
That's right.
It's why did he put brown, red, and green and black beside each other that way? It's really easy to understand, I think, intuitively, why you did that with the Bonhoeffer story. But I would love to hear you talk about color choice in a difficult story.
Yeah.
But also, Miracle Man is not, it's I wouldn't use the word beautiful. I would say it's attractive, it's striking, it's excellent, it's arresting visually, but I wouldn't call it pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not.
Miracle Man, and by the way, just for everybody who's listening, is a children's story, maybe pitched at 7-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Most picture books are, 4 to 8, something like that. Yeah.
So 4 to 8-year-olds, and it's the life of Jesus, which I think, by the way, it's an outstanding book, if I may say so.
Thank you.
But talk about your color choices, maybe first the Bonhoeffer and maybe children's illustrations.
Yeah, it's such a good question, because I do think color and beauty can be relaxing and soothing and pleasant, right? That is one function of beauty, and that's a good one.
Even anesthetizing.
Yes. that is, again, a communication goal.
Right.
But for me, that was not my goal in using color. It was a communication tool. So in Bonhoeffer, there's 2 very striking colors, this teal and then this bright red.
Yep.
And the black of the ink, right? So, and then Hitler kind of gets the red colors, Bonhoeffer gets the teal, and then as their story overlaps, the colors overlap, and those 2 colors vibrate. Yeah, they're very unsettling.
It's unsettling. That is exactly right.
Yes.
It is not, you don't sit there and think, oh, this is so relaxing.
Yes, that's right. And one of the reviewers, I just loved this. She's like, they were writing, I love this book, but it was just, as the colors were so disturbing. And I was like, yes, that is exactly right. Yeah, she's like, there's this dissonance in the color. And I'm like, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Constant clash is how it felt to me.
You have to fight through some of the color at some point, which was intentional and made some people mad. But yeah, the idea was to ratchet the stakes up visually along with the story, which is one of the fun things you can do. It's a trick, really, that an artist can do that a writer, necessarily can't.
Yeah. Miracle Man. Let's talk about that one.
Yes.
Since I've read that, and I've read it to my grandchildren.
Oh, good.
And they liked it.
That's the real audience, yeah.
Yeah. And they're 4.5, 7.5. So
it means a lot to hear from you, someone who has real credentials, that the book was good and meaningful. Because whenever I write stories about Christ, or it feels like, am I really trying to improve on Jesus' words, or kind of punch up the Bible? Like, that seems like a bad idea. And so it
is a bad idea,
right.
by the way. I'm going to approve of your impression.
Thank you.
That trying to improve on the words of Jesus is a bad idea.
Like, he was onto something, but I think I can make this a little pithier.
But you let it stand by. You let things kind of stand by themselves a lot.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. I try to get out of the way and approach it almost like you're hearing a tall tale or something, like a folk story for the first time. And I love that idea of reinventing something we think we know, maybe through pictures or words or a collection of those two things together.
You clearly did research.
Well, thank you. I did. I'm glad it was
What did you
apparent.
research? Why did you think you had to research?
Well, not
a
only
children's story?
The huge problem just visually in depicting Jesus is like a massive problem. What does Jesus look like?
Right.
That's one aspect. So I spent a ton of time looking
So
at.
for the record, this Jesus is kind of lean and wiry looking, which I think
Lean
is
and wiry.
almost certainly correct. We
Right.
can't be sure, but
Can't be sure.
vast majority of all people in the artisan class would have been lean, wiry,
Impoverished, right? Yeah.
strong physically because they had to walk everywhere and
They
work
had
with
to.
their hands and so on.
At one point, I was going to have him wear a black robe. I thought that was an interesting metaphor, but a little research, of course, black dye, very expensive, so that would not have been what he
Right.
wore. But I did also give him embellishments. I mean, obviously, scripturally, where Jesus put his foot down, flowers did not immediately grow after he stepped off the ground, but that is a metaphor, a treat that I am trying to tell a young reader that this is something.
Life-giving.
Yeah, this is like this thing, even though it's not literally that thing.
Right.
So you have to weigh the metaphorical and the literal when you are using art.
I liked your term tall tale, actually. We use that term at our house, always have, a lot. And a lot of tall tales have been fabricated
Right.
in the Doriani household.
Yes.
And a child who, speaking dogs and monkeys who are smarter than the scientists who study them
Yes.
abound
Yeah.
in these worlds. And, by the time a child is 4, they usually have a pretty good grip on what's tall tale and what's real. So I think it's fine. Children get metaphor at an early age.
Well, so I've had some people complain about Miracle Man for one particular passage where Jesus is performing the miracle of loaves and fishes, and in the book, a girl delivers him the meal, not the boy. And lots of folks are very upset about me changing scripture. And of course, they're not pointing out that I'm also, having Jesus turn birds into words and make fish, form sentences on the ground. So there are things that people find literally upsetting where metaphorically other pictures can do things that they don't register in the same way. So it's back to your question about color. The color was meant to change your point of view. I think of color as a communication tool. So what is it trying to do in this passage? Is it drawing your eye to this one thing? Is it making you see a tree in a different color and makes you think of it in a new way?
Yeah. And of course, focal point.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's good. So this sounds to me like a very natural work to you, but it's not easy. You said it took several years to write Bonhoeffer. I'm guessing it wasn't a weekend's enterprise.
That's true.
To write anything, probably 1, 2, 3, 4 years for most projects from first
Picture book I can do about a year.
Okay. From the very first thought till being done?
Well, oh no. I mean, the actual execution of it is about a year, but a couple years ahead of that where I'm kicking it around.
Right.
But graphic novels, the Bonhoeffer thing, that was a full 4 years, 5 years.
So tell me about work a little bit.
So why do you do this?
Well, it's part of it. I mean, obviously, if I have it right, you worked for newspapers.
I do.
Got some awards, like some important newspapers, maybe even.
I've had a few. I've worked in a capacity as an editorial illustrator.
Yeah.
In that sense, working for magazines, newspapers. Yeah. That means they're calling you with an article. You read it, and you give a piece that presents the point of view of the article, but also through the lens of your own editorial idea.
Right, and you might ask them to change things a little bit.
Yeah, or say, I don't necessarily want to illustrate this piece. I mean, that's also an option.
Okay.
I don't necessarily want
to. They think you should illustrate this way, and you say, I'm
Maybe
sorry, but
I can't put my name on this particular thing.
Thank you very much for your proposal, but it's not workable.
That's right.
Right?
And to be honest, most of the days now, if I turn down a piece, it's less for content and more just for time. I mean, that's a gift that I've had the last few years, is to be able to spend more time on my books and do the work I really want to do, rather than doing another spot for Golf Magazine or something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So let me go in that direction. This is a podcast about faith and work. And there are, my guess is there have to be, low tens of millions of people in America who, could make some money or plausibly. I mean, 2 of my children have sort of become the in-house artist for their, and one was kind of earning $100 an hour as a side gig for a while in her career, doing things like chalk art for restaurants. I mean, she's good.
That's great.
But it's not her job.
Right.
I'm guessing there are probably 10, 20, 30 million people who have some pretty serious artistic ability.
Oh,
which I'm just
100%.
hinting. It runs, my grandfather was a painter.
Yeah.
My wife, 2 of my kids. It just floats around. I have none of it, just to be totally clear. But it floats around in certain families.
Yeah, it's true.
And some people try to make a living doing things like drawing corn for, shop and save grocery stores. What would you say to the many, many, many people who are artistically gifted and it's probably not going to be a career for them?
Mm-hmm. You do not have to get paid for your work to be a real artist. I think this is the number one thing I tell people. The idea, this is an American idea, that for your calling to be real, it has to pay the bills. And I just disagree with that as a Christian. The calling to make things, like the very first thing we learn about God, it's like the fifth word. He created, right? So we are creators. We make in the manner that we were made. So, okay, you make stuff. Keep making those things, whatever that is. If you crochet, like if you make firewood into sculptures, that is art in my mind.
And it adorns your home.
Absolutely.
And it enriches life for your friends.
It's gifts to other people. It's absolutely. Then there's this other thing of art being a career, a commodity, and that is another art form.
Right.
Now, being able to make stuff that you truly love and are fed by while also getting paid, that is a very narrow hoop to jump through. And it is possible, and it takes a lot of work and discipline and trial and error.
And some breaks.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did you have any breaks? Were you always...
I look back and I'm like...
Did it fall in your lap? Or?
Absolutely. I fell backwards into my career. I don't know how it happened. I mean, I moved to New York for grad school. I'm a guy hustling on the pavement trying to get work. I get a few things. I got to think of the Village Voice. As an artist, showing my work. Like, basically, it's like an actor. You just go around and deliver your portfolio. And then I met a guy who worked at the New York Times, and there was an internship there, and I applied for the internship, and I had some experience working in PR before I moved to New York.
So you understood the life of a newspaper.
Yeah,
you could speak their language.
That's right. Or I could talk on the phone. I could deliver an email promptly. Just things that were like
basic life skills.
Yes. And so I eventually got hired as an assistant art director on the op-ed page in the New York Times, which is like a chapel of illustration, basically. It invented the editorial illustration as we know it today. So I worked there for 3 years. Oh, yeah. There's lots of portraiture. There's visual ideas. I worked with Milton Glaser on a piece. I worked with all these phenomenal artists. And that really gave me this huge...
opening.
Yeah. And it was...
Friends.
People spend their whole lives trying to work at the New York Times. And I don't know what happened. I woke up one day and I'm working in the New York Times.
Well, you must have some ability. I mean, they wouldn't have invited you if you had no ability.
Yes, that's right. It's hard to believe that's true, but yeah.
But the point is there are lots of other people with high ability.
That's true.
And maybe the sense... there was a musician who... was very successful and went through his entire life insisting that there were so many musicians who were more talented than he. And people said, oh, you're just so humble. He said, no, I'm realistic. It's the truth. I wrote a song, it became a hit, blah, blah, blah. 40 years later, I'm still writing these songs. Trust me when I say there are people so much more talented.
Yeah, I think the people that make it, it's never a measure of their talent. It's a measure of their desire. It's just putting yourself in places where you can be successful over and over and over again, even though there's no data to back up the fact that you will be successful.
Right. You never know.
No. And I had lots of more talented people that I met, but, I, for whatever reason, wanted it enough to continually subject myself to, basically pain. I mean, anything that we do in our lives that's valuable is going to cost us something, right?
Yes.
And so you have to put yourself out in a place of this is going to be costly, this is going to be painful, and to normalize struggle as you are making something good. And then you do that enough, you're going to be in the right place at the right time.
So one of the things I'm thinking of as you say all this is that you had to be willing to be an artist who was also promptly answering emails and putting yourself in a not overtly artistic environment. In other words, you had to be willing to do a little bit of, some people call it compromise. Other people would say you had to find your niche in society where your particular talents were wanted and not be an artist all the time.
Yeah.
You had to be an artist part of the time and take on other tasks that enabled you to flourish.
So much of my career now is like waiting for the time I get to do the art, or like you have to prepare to do the art, and it's like, when am I going to get to the art? And in the same way, I tell my students, never say no to a job because you think you can't do it. Like just take it. Like what could happen? You know, I mean, they're like, oh, I'll get embarrassed. I won't know what I'm doing. I'm like,
so you'll learn from the critique.
You will. Yeah. You just have to throw yourself in, and it feels so awful. But there were many moments in my life, like working at the York Times, where I had never laid out a newspaper before, but I knew Quark Express. I knew how to talk on the phone. I'll figure it out. And, you know, that's part of the fun of it.
It is. Yeah. It is. And I often tell people when they're a little bit stuck in their work, just volunteer for something off to the side. You know, it's not part of your job description. I'll help with that. And then you learn a skill, you meet new people, maybe a door opens up that wasn't ordinarily going to open. You don't do it necessarily in a cold, calculating way, but you just try things.
Well, and in my book, Drawing is Magic, which is built off a lot of my teaching, I teach students to really center enjoyment in making as a way to find that thing that you like. If you're not being paid to do the kind of work you want to do, find your friend's band and tell them you want to make them a t-shirt, because that's the thing you want to make, right? Like, so get to the heart of making that is centered around, I enjoy the process, not the outcome. You know, like people focus on, I want the book to be published so I can have a New York Times bestseller and be famous. But like, oh, the actual writing? Oh, I hate writing, you know? But like, that's 99.9% of the entire experience, you know? So. Well,
you're, as an author, you know perfectly well that, you know, you're never finished with a book. I'm done. Well, no, the editor has one more round. I'm done. No, there's 3 pages of questions.
Yeah.
By the time the book's done, you're sick to death of it.
You're so done. Yeah, as Picasso said, I don't finish anything, I just abandon it. So that's what it feels like.
Who said that?
Picasso.
Okay, yeah, right.
Just this, it's done. Just throw it away. I mean,
right.
And then in publishing, I finish a book and then it doesn't come out for a year later. So by the time it's actually out, I've actually detached in this very healthy way, where I've forgotten all the trauma.
Right.
I'm not so invested in it.
Yeah.
It's actually good.
Yeah, that can happen for sure. Although it doesn't always happen. It can happen. Yes. I don't finish a painting, I just abandon it. You know, another way to say it is no one ever finishes a book, someone pries it out of their hands.
That's right.
Another way to say it is nobody ever finishes a book, they just stop writing. Same idea.
You're so right, though, because I'm in the midst of edits for my editor right now on my Tolkien and Lewis manuscript, and just this morning I was having to cut some things that I love, and I just, the sort of anguished moan that comes out when I'm like, delete, you know, but
you're keeping it somewhere, though.
I do. I save it at the end. I have a little thing called Boneyard. I just put it down there.
Yeah. I call it cuts at the end of my
and it's
books.
like I can't quite.
Yeah,
I
just in case.
Yeah, it's so.
And once in a while they
pathetic.
want it. I stick it in. I'll stick these things that they cut.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it at the bottom of the last chapter. They go, what's this? This is something you wanted me to cut.
Right.
Well, it's really good. I said, well, I agree. That's why I stuck it at the end of the chapter.
Thank you. I'm going to use that.
By all means. It's sort of recalcitrance. I don't know. So God gave you a gift. Obviously, you were drawing things when you were little.
I don't remember a time before drawing. I don't remember a time before Jesus, and I think those are connected in my story. I think most people were drawing when they were young.
Yes.
And then they stopped for whatever reason. Usually about 12 years old, when that self-consciousness gene kicks in, and you're like, oh, that person does it else. That person does it better. And
which
then certain
may be
people,
true, of course.
Of course. Someone's always doing it better.
Right.
But for whatever reason, people that continue to draw, they have to do it, or it does something to them that they can't find in another place.
Yeah, even if they're only doing it for their husband, wife, or kids.
Right.
Right. That's good. So we keep it up for the sheer joy of it. I'm going to ask you a couple of, sort of spiritual questions, if I may. Do you pray before you draw? Do you pray as you draw?
Okay.
Do you pray that your work will bring light, joy, peace, love, understanding into this world? How do you offer it to God?
So that's such a good question. It's such a good question. I am afraid of thinking too highly of my own work, right? So I rarely pray versions of, Lord, let this work go out and do your great bidding. That doesn't sit right with me. Usually it's prayers to humility, although I am not above praying that a particular passage of a drawing would go well, especially when I do watercolor over pen and ink. And so,
challenging,
you got one pass on some of these things. And there's just sometimes it's like, okay, Lord, it's your will. I hope this goes well. But I do pray. I draw during church. That's actually one of the periods where I feel the most connected to drawing as a worship form.
You draw what the pastor's
it sounds crazy, yes, but I'm basically jazz improving to the pastor's sermon.
Even remotely crazy to me, because
it's great.
My daughter I mentioned would just draw during church. She didn't. Some take notes, others draw.
Because I cannot watch someone speak to me without 2-3 minutes in, I'm somewhere else. So the hand moving, I can hear better.
Yeah.
And there's folks in my church that crochet or do various hand things while listening, and it's a version of that. It's just I draw, and when I'm drawing, that's when I actually enjoy drawing the most. And so, when
even if nothing ever comes of it.
That's right. Just the act of, it's like kids on a playground. No one. When you watch kids on the monkey bars, no one's like, you're doing it wrong, right? It's just the act is to enjoy, right? So art as play is a thing that we have completely lost.
Yes, I love that. It's a little bit like music as play, right? Mm-hmm. When a child or an adult is noodling around, you don't say, well, you can't play those notes. Well, I just did.
Yeah.
And I understand if it's a person with some sophisticated understanding of musical theory that I didn't follow the Dorian mode as you think I should have.
Right.
But it sounded good to me.
Yeah.
And I may do something with it someday.
That's right.
Right. So you do try to love God and neighbor through your art, though, especially the art that's deliberately public. Mm-hmm. How do you conceive of that? Let me put it this way. We like the phrase around here, changing our corner of the world. We're not going to change the world, but we might want to change one corner of the world. How do you try to change your corner of the world through your art? Mm-hmm. What's your goal?
For me, art making is deeply connected with sharing, with otherness. I think there are people in the world that can make purely for themselves, and that is why they make work. But I think that percentage is actually very small. I think those people are the exception. That most of the time, we are longing to communicate something with someone besides ourselves.
Right. By which you mean art or music, or maybe you're a storyteller.
That's right, a writer. Or, if you were, I do this as an exercise with my students, my graduate students. If you were on a desert island the rest of your life, you had all the provisions in the world, would you make art? And if you did, what would you make? Right? If the idea of sharing it with others was gone, how does that change your frame of what you think art making is?
What's your answer to your question?
I honestly, I don't know if I would continue to make the same things. I think I might do ceramics. I don't know. I think I would focus on something that had such material and physical enjoyment that it was made purely for that moment of making. But to me, sharing my work with others and thinking about, I'm sweating all the details on this book on my drawing table. I'm done with it, and then many times I forget that it goes out into the world and children check it out from a library and have an experience with it. But I'll hear from them, and that's wonderful. That's some of the most satisfying things, is to hear kids responding to what you've made.
So what have you learned by working as an artist that you would never have learned otherwise if you'd been a bricklayer or a marketing guy or something?
Well, being an artist requires you to separate yourself from your work in a very real way. I see this with young artists where art making feels so personal, right? And it is. It's when you write that story that's centered in an experience you had in childhood and you put that out in the world, that's different than laying some bricks in a sidewalk that maybe someone just doesn't like the color of, right? It feels...
Or they do like the color.
Or maybe they love the color,
yeah,
right. Just as you were getting at, the reverse of that is also very tempting when you put that story out and someone loves it, to like turn your work into this idol of self-love, of self-fulfillment. That can also be a danger too. So I have found that healthy separation of the work you make from you is just, to me, you have to conquer that early on in art making. I'm going to make something. It's not me. Right. This work is going to go out. It's going to have flaws.
If it's disliked, they don't hate me.
They don't hate me.
If
it's
they
not perfect.
like you, it doesn't mean you're now an acceptable person.
That's right. It doesn't justify you as this great person.
I now have a meaning in life because I am loved.
So there's so much temptation to do that.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
I remember quite a few years ago, I heard a concert violinist, and there are different ways in which musicians introduce themselves, and some of them just stand up and start playing, which I really like.
Yeah.
And others want to tell you about how this song came to them in a dream, and they spend about half the concert talking about why they played this chord at this moment. Mm-hmm. This guy took an almost just start playing plus nothing approach. He was a soloist. He could do whatever he wanted. He did stage. He could talk. He could play. Solo violin, 1,000 people. He just said, I have something for you.
Yes, that's all you need. That's right. Love it.
When you said that, it when you talked about your delivery of a work to the world, it reminded me of that. You may like it or not. I do have it for you, and I prepared it with you in mind.
Yeah, it's describe, don't explain. Like, I do not like things explained to me, right? Mm-hmm. So here is a meal I've made for you. Yes. Yeah, give it a try. Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Very good. So you're kind of like that violinist a little bit. You're also an elder in a church, I think. Is that right?
I am. Grace and Peace Fellowship.
What would you say to a church about art in the church?
I'm teaching a class with the Carver Project in July, which is an organization of Christian faculty at WashU, and I'm teaching on art in the church. And this is such an interesting question. I think the biggest complaint I have about the arts and the church is just the lack of weird art that is celebrated.
Weird art.
Weird. Yeah. There are so many weird things in the world, and yet the church seems to recoil at weirdness for fear that it might be doing something blasphemous or how is this supporting the gospel? The sort of overly functionality of art making, right? And so if you really did want to support the arts, it would not be just liturgical banners. It would probably be having an artist in residence program where you just give artists a space and say, go make your weird, fancy hats or whatever. And, don't tell us what you're doing.
My daughter, the artist, once drew me a chameleon and had these words on it in a very lovely script. This is a chameleon. It is your birthday.
This is what more of this. Yes.
I think that's what you're driving at.
Yeah.
And something it's a lovely, whimsical, funny, but also pretty realistic chameleon. And I think you're saying we could just have lizard drawings in the church. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to signify redemption or the fall. We're just drawing a lizard here.
Well, Jesus seemed to be very interested in surprise or things that were unexpected or reframing your expectations on what you think religiousness is. And I do think he was an artist. He told stories. He created illustrations in our minds. He didn't draw, but he was using visual metaphor.
We would say so far, maybe he did draw.
He wrote in the sand. There's that one passage.
But yes, he was certainly an artist, and of his poetic speech, which we don't recognize as poetry, but it abounds.
Right.
It's just for the sheer literary beauty at times. I mean, when I read, I think it's beautiful. It could be an ordinary prose, and it would still have the same content, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Just for fun. And some of his parables are just great stories.
They're great. And they're mysterious. They're not immediately evident what the conclusion is. And I'm not saying art solves all the church's problems. I just mean that I just wish the church would embrace mystery and things that are unusual and maybe don't have an obvious and clear answer.
Not essentially looking always to the functionality.
Correct.
What I'm hearing you say. Yeah, that's a good word. All right. So, do you have anything else you want to say about your career? I want to move to toward some of our standard questions for a minute. Do you have anything else you want to talk about that we haven't squeezed in?
No. The only thing I want to cover about this is I think a helpful metric when thinking about art that people don't understand is I think of two big bubbles of mystery and clarity. And art can do both of those things, help unpack those things very well. And I think a good artist, like when I'm doing the story of Bonhoeffer, I'm trying to bring clarity to something that maybe is needing that. And a lot of artists are trying to actually enhance the mystery of something. And so occasionally, art will do both of those things simultaneously, increase both clarity and mystery. I think of like a rainbow, right? It is so clearly a demonstration of beauty and so clearly mysterious, right?
Yes.
And so there are these magic moments where art can do both of those things. So that's often what I'm aspiring towards.
Yeah, but mystery is a good way of saying it. I mean, sometimes we're moved and we don't exactly know why. We were actually talking before we started about lecturing. And you and I both know that you were saying we have to be entertainers, but sometimes we're, we appeal to the mystic dimension of the human soul. We don't even know we're doing it. We suddenly see that maybe somebody's in tears, or somebody's laughing for unknown reasons, or the room is eerily quiet, and we're not sure how that happened.
Right.
But we were well prepared. We're doing our best.
Yeah, you entered the moment willingly.
Happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay, so we talked about a whole lot of things. One question I like to ask. So if we almost hit this one. If somebody is a commercial artist, they think, well, I just draw labels for canned goods or frozen. What would you say? They say, my work is meaningless. I'm not putting a ding in the universe. I aspire to be like you, John. How can I be like you? How can my work be meaningful? What would you say to a 24-year-old who's a commercial artist working for, a manufacturer?
Make those things. If there's a calling on your heart to make stuff, do it right now. Don't wait till someone pays you to do it. Just start making that thing you want to make, first of all.
So if you're tired of doing chickens, do chickens, and after you're done with the chickens, go home and do something else.
That's what I did. I literally did poultry brochures. In my first job. Yeah, I designed for this chicken feed company.
Yeah.
And there is such honor in a craft and a trade that's well known and well loved, and making
art for consumer goods like food is worthwhile.
It's providing clarity. That's what design is.
Tells you what you're going to buy.
Yes, design is a function of clarity and hierarchy, and those are things God loves. So you are. I was at a lecture once, and someone said, raise their hand, and you said you worked in advertising. I think advertising is of the devil.
Oh.
And I said, oh, okay. And he's like, well, because it's lies. It's just taking things and turning them into lies so people will buy them.
So inside this box, there are not Wheaties. There are cockroaches.
Well, I said a version of, but what if you had a good product and you really wanted that product to be out there? I think you're sort of using... Yeah. Right. So anyway, I think the box is all fallen, okay? We know that. And there are redemptive forms, of every job, profession. There are fallen versions of that profession. So I think it's wrong to sort of pick the weeds out of the wheat. And
art is like a cell phone or a shovel or a microphone. It's a tool. You can use it for evil, but it doesn't mean it is evil.
That's right.
You use shovels. You can hit somebody in the shins with a shovel. That doesn't make shovels evil.
But I think it's also wrong to say like this design of this green beans can is somehow less worthy of redemption than someone writing a book necessarily, right? Like
People
there's this
need to know there are green beans here. If you
Right,
want to eat
right.
green beans,
Yeah.
then vegetables are good for you.
for some people, beautiful labels are their calling, and it is a task of making things gorgeous, and that is holy and good.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Let me ask you a few questions. What do you do to play or to relax other than draw more?
I know, it's so true. Like my thing I do when I'm not working is do different work. Is my
Okay, so when you relax, you draw.
I do draw
Sometimes.
for fun. Yeah.
But what else do you do?
I love my garden and my yard. I like dirt. I like the process of planting and basically designing, but with living things, you know. So that's one thing I love doing.
A lot of plants are beautiful.
Oh man, God it's a master class in shape, contrast, form,
Shading.
It's great. Yeah.
That's good. What do you play with your kids? 15 and 12. It's a little.
Man.
They're not 7 and 5.
They're not.
Do you play board games?
So I am a huge board game fan, and for whatever reason, I failed as a parent in many ways. My daughter will play super complicated games with me, and my son will have very little of it now. We have had a thing. We all love Star Wars, so we have.
Action figures?
With the movies, yeah, but we have done a thing over the years since they were very little of like a YouTube show. It's like a commentary show about Star Wars. So that's one thing we've done together over the years. It's like doing something creative where we write the script.
And it builds skills. And
that's right.
You can laugh at how it turns out, maybe.
And they watch them back through the years, and now my son's getting to the age where
watch them.
It's on my YouTube channel, so you can find it. I don't really put it out there, but every now and then someone will find it and be like, "What are these?" But my son, he's just at the age now where it's like he's just a little too cool. He's just like afraid, like, oh no,
somebody's gonna find this.
Yes, that's great.
That's good. So you write books, you illustrate books. What books do you like to give to your friends to read?
Oh man. I was telling just earlier, I'm rereading Dune right now. The books that I read as a kid were fantasy.
Yeah, Dune is especially the first volume. I think.
Oh, it's a masterpiece.
Somebody put some extensive research into that.
Oh, it's gorgeous. The prose is great. I forgot I read it in high school.
It's deeply ecological as
well.
It
is. It's this great commentary. The prose is beautiful. I forgot how well it was written. Anyway.
I think he ran out of gas toward the end.
Well, he was probably, like all of us, like cashing the check. The editor was telling him, like, these Dune books are selling like crazy. Like, you got to do 10 more.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah. I thought you said you know that.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I'm speculating.
Okay. I speculate with you.
As a person who knows the feeling of, like, after Faithful Spy did well, my agent, my editor was like, who's...
Faithful Spy number 2.
Basically. Like, who's another person like this in...
Civil War, maybe.
Civil War, Nazi era, or
right.
like... And I just was like, I'm sorry, I'm a little... I really want to talk about Tolkien and Lewis and how much they loved smoking pipes together and reinvented fantasy. And they're like, we're not totally sure about that.
We're not sure about the market for pictures of men smoking pipes.
Again, yes. I somehow sold them a graphic novel about a German theologian, so I feel like
the whole theme is pipes.
That's it.
European intellectuals who smoke pipes. That's your life's work.
That's a huge category,
Hendricks,
to be honest.
The world's #1 author of graphic novels about intellectuals who smoke pipes.
Dark, wooden-lined rooms. Yes, right.
Yes. Well, that would be quite an
Wait, what were we talking about? Things you hand... Oh, okay. Gilead is a book I always give people.
Okay, yes.
Marilyn Robinson, love her. I'm reading Jack right now, the 4th in that series, but I've read Gilead several times. Annie Dillard.
Yes. Oh, my
Pilgrim at
goodness.
Tinker Creek. I used to read that once a year.
Isn't that overwrought a little bit, though?
This particular
The prose,
connection?
isn't it a little bit? Doesn't she
Annie
overdo
Dillard's?
it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I got that when I was
thought
25 years
she needed
old.
an editor.
Yeah.
Like, just tame down this prose.
That's right.
I liked it, but I mean, every dead bug is worth a chapter.
Oh, she spends an entire chapter just laying in the woods watching a beaver or a badger do nothing, literally nothing. Yeah, I tried to get my wife to read it.
I love The Writing Life is another book I love of hers. So don't take, listeners, do not take it as derogatory.
Send all hate mail about Annie Dillard to Dan
I
Doriani.
deeply admire Annie Dillard. I just thought Pilgrim at Tinker Creek was a little bit overdone. I'm amazed at how we read similar books, or maybe not amazed.
Well, you know what? One thing about Annie Dillard, I read Pilgrim at Tinker Creek when I was 25, and for whatever reason, that book unlocked my heart.
Okay.
And I wrote her a letter because I made a painting of. She uses a visual metaphor in that book called "The Tree with the Lights in It." So I made a painting of the tree with the lights in it and sent it to her.
And
she wrote me back. And
Did
so
she?
yeah, I have a framed letter from her in my home that I that was a moment where I was like, not only is this person important to me, but they're like a real human being that responded. It was a crazy moment of like, oh wait, maybe I could do this, But
that's interesting. Put aside all practical considerations. What would you do differently? What other job might you take for 1 year? I know that what you might most want to do is have unlimited time to work on graphic novels.
That's right.
I accept that.
Yes.
But let's suppose that you're going to do something significantly different from that.
I think I would. Well, I remember vividly telling my parents that I wanted to be a puppeteer and a Air Force pilot, and that didn't work out. That particular combination, there wasn't a lot of university programs.
I think that's called drone flying.
Yeah,
drones.
that's right. Yeah.
Air Force pilot, really?
I don't know what. I must have seen Top Gun. I don't know what. I just vividly remember my parents sort of like being polite, but like
puzzled.
That's not gonna. Yeah.
Yeah,
they were very supportive, though.
That's not going to fly. You didn't want to say that.
Yeah, normally they're so supportive. So to see the sort of immediate, like...
Well, okay, you're avoiding my question.
I'm sorry.
What would you like to do? Would you...
I always wanted to go to seminary. So if I could be a professional seminary student...
you could probably do that for a semester anyway.
Okay,
it's called sabbatical.
That's right.
Yep.
I love music, but I'm not a very good practitioner of music. So I think if I had just time to reinvent, like learn songwriting or the acoustic guitar, or I love the idea of the singer-songwriter. It probably in the same way the author-illustrator, like that ability to craft something that exists in space temporarily and then is gone as a song.
Yep.
Very interesting conceptually.
Yes. Yeah. Somehow this reminds me of Oscar Isaac, the actor.
Oh yeah.
I think he's in Star Wars.
Yes, that's right. Poe Dameron.
And he's quite a musician. Did you know that?
He was at Llewyn Davis, and inside Llewyn Davis.
He did it all himself.
He
was a professional musician for a while.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So all the songs that Llewyn Davis plays, he plays and sings with no extraordinary embellishment.
That's those things when like actors say, "Oh, I spent 6 months learning this skill."
He actually was a musician.
I'm secretly jealous of the ability to I want to devote 6 months and learn the nunchucks or something. For this is why I'm a university faculty member.
You're not quite following the question when you talk about nunchucks. I'm sorry. Can
we cut that out of the?
If you were, we've kind of covered this, but I'll give you a minute if you want to say what word would you give to a talented newcomer to your field?
This is the thing I regret in my own practice, was I was not patient. I did not know how long it took to do good work. I did not know how long it would take to become good at my craft. I did not publish my own book until 10 years out of undergrad. And if you had told me when I graduated college that my first book would come out 10 years later, I would have assumed I was in some sort of coma for most of that time, that I'd had some sort of accident. But no, it just takes a long time to figure yourself out, to learn the craft, and to get a lucky break. And you gotta be persistent and patient that whole time. And that's a long time to walk through the wilderness, basically.
Especially when you're 23. I mean, 10 years is, my goodness.
And everyone tells you that your 20s are like the best time of your life. That's basically a fiction.
It's
kind of
like
money.
I think it's like being engaged.
Yes. Yes.
You're just waiting and
That's
waiting.
right. I mean, you have no real career, you have no family, you have no influence.
Not much money usually.
Right.
You have a great strength, but you can't do what you want with it.
Yeah. And yet young people look around, they're like, well, Taylor Swift and Mark Zuckerberg were millionaires when they're 25, so I guess I missed my chance. I'm 27. And
not a wise thought.
You're just figuring it out. Yeah.
Last question. Who should I interview next?
Oh man, so many thoughts about this. So I met a wonderful artist in Nebraska recently.
Yeah.
Okay. She is
graphic visual artist.
Oh no, a singer-songwriter.
Okay.
Right. Her name's Hope Dunbar. She is a really interesting person. Writes amazing songs. I just talked to her on a podcast she did last week. She's great. Another person I want to recommend, Vesper Stamper. Okay, she was a musician. She was a musician for many years, and then she lost her ability to play music and started writing and illustrating. And she's written several illustrated novels that have done very well, and they're gorgeous. A lot of the themes that we've covered, she would have a lot to say. Yeah.
Well, if you really think it's worthwhile, tell them I may, connect us.
I'll do that.
Email.
For a small fee, I will connect you.
Well, your fee's right there over there in front of you.
Oh, thank you. Great. I'm glad we worked that out.
John, it's been great to get to know you. I've known who you are for a while. I've known some of your friends, and it's lovely to have a conversation. But more important than lovely, I think it's informative, and I hope it's deeply encouraging to people who work hard and want to make a difference through their work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and rate us on your preferred podcast platform. You can visit our website at faithandworkstl.org. There you can subscribe to our podcast, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Faith and Work cohorts, leave us a message, and more. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Faith and Work STL, and find the video version of this show on our YouTube channel. All these links are available in the podcast show notes and on our website. Thanks for listening.